Hello and welcome to B2B Revenue Leaders. I'm your host, Dustin. This episode is brought to you by Testimonial Hero. So as marketers, we all want customer stories. I've been there, but we're always busy with a million other things. Testimonial Hero is an extension of your team that helps you scale customer stories in both written and video form. And today I'm joined by Victoria Sakal, who is the head of growth at Wonder. And we're talking about lowercase r research, which I had never heard of or thought of before. And it's a really interesting topic that I'm glad we had on here. And I mean, the short of it, it's a lot less scary and a lot less expensive than uppercase R research. So on to the episode. Hey, Victoria, welcome to the show.
Exciting to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. I was really happy when you reached out about a topic that I had never heard before, because I like going into these a little bit blind and learning a bit. So let's start off with that. You mentioned lowercase r research. So what is that? What does that mean?
Yeah, maybe to take a step back and provide some context, we're probably all familiar with big R research, which is what we know, whether we do it or not. We know we should be doing to understand our audience, understand our competitors, be monitoring the landscape, to be testing if a new product or messaging will even resonate. But big R typically comes with the association of it's going to take a while to do, not only to due diligence and find the right partner, but then to launch the study and then get this big chunk of data back and mine it and figure out what to do with the information. But it's also going to cost a lot. It's going to be a significant resource investment from a lot of different fronts. The idea behind little r research is we need to be smart and informed as professionals, no matter whether you're marketing, sales, product, or anything in between. And with the way tools and solutions and the world has evolved, there's so many ways you can get insights that can power good decisions. And that kind of brings together then insights on what people are saying online or how they're using your product from a behavior and a product analytics perspective to your closed lost calls and who they're purchasing instead of you as a company. But all of these sort of like metadata, agile sources of insights is what goes into little r. So it's less of a barrier to entry really for the types of information that you might be needing or really should be using to make better decisions.
Yeah, that makes sense. And big R is, like you said, scary and expensive, because when I think about it, I think I don't have the money and I don't have the time. It's the short of it. So is little r then more of an ongoing thing? Because when I picture traditional research, I think this massive study where I get a third party to come in and run it for 6 months and then it's done, and maybe I do it again in 2 years. So is this more like an ongoing, consistent stream of research you're thinking through?
Yeah, we talk about it in two different ways, actually. So there's a total of 3 buckets, because one of them is big R in the sense of it might be a really massive mapping of your competition or a real big teardown of a trend that you might need to invest, either because you don't have the time or the interest or the experience to don't do it yourself, whatever reason. There might be a big R bucket. Within the little r, there's 2 sort of vectors. One of them is ongoing. So you might be social listening, right? You might be getting a read of certain mentions on a consistent basis. You might be getting or monitoring even like newsletters to see what is happening in your space. You might have on your calendar the 1 or 2 hours a week that you just go into communities and you see what people are talking about, whatever it is. And then there is kind of ad hoc project. So it's not necessarily something you're doing on a weekly or even monthly basis, but CEO comes to you asking about a new competitor and you need a quick way to get smart really fast. And that sometimes means quick Google search, or now using an LLM. It could mean control Fing for mentions of that competitor and gone calls. It could mean, again, going into your different sources of attribution, what people are mentioning as their alternatives that they're considering or who they're coming to you from, but getting creative with all the ways to get quick. You're not going to go launch a big study to get that quick answer, but it's going to be a little bit more ad hoc than necessarily an always on drumbeat to stay smart on a given player or space or whatever it is.
Okay. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I found, as someone who has had to do some of the a lot of the ad hoc research on my own without support, what I find I struggle with personally is I do it, it goes and lives somewhere, and no one does anything with it. So I'm curious how you think through that. It's one thing to do the research. It's another thing to analyze and actually implement it. And I think that's where people fall off, honestly, and blow a lot of the time they spent on the front end.
It's a really interesting point, because the other complexity of that is when you're sitting down to go then do this ad hoc piece of research, you are anticipating that on the back end. So again, CEO comes to you with a question, you might just be like, I'm just going to quickly Google, copy the first sentence and ship it off in Slack, right? Versus when we think about, you could tap all those 15 different sources I just mentioned, and then you'd be like, great, thanks. What's the TLDR anyway? So it becomes an element of who is the audience and what are the decisions that they are thinking of making off of the information and why they're asking. We think about that a lot in terms of, you can call it tier 1, tier 2, door 1, door 2, Bezos style decisions. But when we're helping our clients think through this, it's sometimes, is it just information that you're vetting? You need to know, should I care about this? Do I put this in a bucket of a further action? Or is it a like, great, nothing to worry about here type of question or decision that's being informed? The next bucket would then be, we know this is a priority, but is it like gaining momentum? Is this something that we need to be doubling down or pick up a project or initiative around or send someone to go do some bigger effort to spend time on? And then the other last, and this is again where the big R doesn't go away, but it becomes more point in time, is we know this is a priority. We know there's a decision coming off of this, or we know this product is launching and we're going to have messaging and we want to get it right. So you think about those almost levels of confidence, or we talk about like level of fidelity you need for whatever the question is or the project that's coming your way, because then you can say, okay, CEO just wants to know, because an investor raised this competitor, if this is something that we should even be concerned about, and I need to give him a quick answer. But I, or maybe my colleague in product marketing, might need to know, we just discovered this new competitor and this should be on your radar. And then you start to fall into this cascade of, then the product marketer says, thanks for letting me know, I'm going to start monitoring this now. And then the next time I do a big competitive intelligence refresh, that big R project, I'm going to include that competitor and also maybe their competitors, because I've discovered a new alternative solution or whatever it is. So a very long-winded way of when you think about who the stakeholder is and what the decision or the concern that they're ultimately coming to you with the question about, or what the project is ultimately trying to solve. And then from there, it becomes like, how do you get the right level and volume of information for either yourself or for them or for other stakeholders to be like, here's what I found, here's what you should go do with it or not. Now I'll underscore, we're a super lean team, and you can like send the most pithy, perfectly aligned with how they like to receive things, information to product. And if they're just too busy to act on it, that's just like a workflow thing that you have to, that's like when you go to a consultant, right? And you can get the best deliverable, but if they don't embed the result, it's a whole part of the process.
Yeah, I think the stakeholder piece, both for who you distribute to, but also who you bring in and involve, is a really key piece. Like, where obviously I'd be involved in this because I lead marketing here, but we're doing like a brand refresh essentially, or a narrative refresh, because we just purchased a company that expanded our capabilities. So I would look at that through a different lens than maybe someone on the more creative side, creative brand side, or the CEO. So we bring us all in there and are thinking through it. So on that note, one thing I'm curious about, and there's probably no actual answer for this, but who needs to own this little R research? Because a company that is lean, like your team, my team, your team might have it actually. We definitely don't have someone dedicated to research. So who owns it? Or is it like a shared responsibility if you're going to run it this way?
For us, it falls with me because I do our product marketing. But that said, whether it's our smaller clients or our massive Fortune 500 clients, it is actually, there's a current way and there's like the ideal way. And the current way is somebody sits and I hear the question and I go and I either do the ad hoc study or respond to the question, or I monitor and I'm just like queue for all these questions people have asked me. The ideal, and this is why we're big advocates of it, is like everybody on the job is responsible for certain domains of expertise. And so when the competitor question comes up, or why, or what trends are starting to affect our close rates or whatever, like this shouldn't be coming through me if it's a sales question. And somebody on the sales team should have the tools to be able to get a quick insight. And they should also have that muscle where, again, it's like, I don't know what the analogy at the gym is. You don't just go to the gym to run a marathon every day. Like sometimes you go and you lift a little weight, and you have to be able to do the smaller bite-sized pieces and turn around those insights. Otherwise, this research person or research function is going to be a total bottleneck. And so AI has really democratized how easy it is for people to get answers to questions. The challenge then becomes, even to your point before, if it becomes really hard to get an accurate answer or something that's really relevant to the question being asked or the context of your business or your company, people like then are discouraged and are either just not asking these little R questions, or they're punting them to some centralized research person who has like probably bigger and more ongoing projects to be worrying about versus let me put my hat on the sales guy and like where they would turn to find this information when it could just go to that person themselves.
Yeah, so you mentioned enabling giving the tools to the different teams, the different people. I'm curious to maybe peek behind the curtain a bit and how you're doing that, particularly with sales, because I guess I can say this because I was in sales for a long time and still been. A lot of them just want to sell. They don't want to do the research, take the time. They don't want to do that. That's a marketing thing. Marketing, you go do that and give me the answers. So I'm curious how you work through that and maybe what you're doing internally to really enable them.
Yeah, there's a qualitative and a quantitative approach to this that's worked for us. The qual conversation is to say what's working or what's not working or what are you seeing? Because they have those answers. They're sitting and thinking about it, or if they're not, they'll take the 5 seconds and they'll come up with something. The quantitative side is interesting when it's something that's going to like ultimately help optimize their performance, or I'm asking this so that it's an education problem that I can equip you with something that helps people come to you more educated and therefore you convert more of them. The connection to value is very intuitive. I think there is a whole underlying piece of here when you think of ops and infrastructure that if it's hard for me to get information, it's probably going to be hard for them to get information. And neither of us wants to go down that rabbit hole. But the combination of just capture what you can from them, that's little R, right? It's not like a formal study to go interview all of our sales team and ask them all the questions. Like, what are you seeing and hearing, and bubble that up for me so that I can see if that gains momentum over time, but then also couple that with data when it's available in order to achieve some objective, whether it's for marketing or sales or the business growth overall.
Yeah. Okay. No, awesome. That makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned a whole bunch of different ways of collecting, analyzing data. Like you mentioned AI for some of it, some qualitative, some quantitative. I assume you have some sort of kind of framework built out for different types of research that you're doing. So do you want to maybe walk through that, or at least maybe some of the key ones that you think every company should be doing and should be focused on?
Yeah, I'll say we don't have the perfect framework fully built out. I thought about this a lot at different stages of my career where I've worked with every different size of company and every different type of research. And there, unfortunately or fortunately, is no one size fits all model, right? If you have a centralized research team or a massive budget, it's going to vary. But a couple of ingredients that go into your cake, or whatever the analogy is, it basically comes down to internal data. So what sort of product analytics, or you can even consider call recordings and anything that's owned and maybe like creative or unstructured across your organization is bucket one. What our data has shown is that is generally where people are very savvy and they tend to start, but also where they tend to stop, because then the next bucket becomes primary research as well as secondary research. So primary would be going to talk to either existing customers or non-customers to hear literally in their words, perceptions or needs or whatever it is. Desk research is something that's been publicly available and published out there, but it's not necessarily through the lens of exactly your audience and who you're trying to hear from. And so through the combination of those different pieces, and then you add in, like you could consider social listening to be external research. You could consider it almost a hybrid, but there's all these different, who are the people are, what are they saying? How are they feeling? Did somebody else report on this? Is it external in that sense, or desk research? Or is it something that you're specifically fielding in a study perspective to get an answer to something that matters to you? A combination of all of those things is what's going to be most helpful. The only other point I'll make is at different times of your decision-making or your strategy process, some of those pieces will ebb and flow and they are important. So like the final decision of your message testing, you're going to want to make sure you tested that as you can attest to with the people who are actually you're trying to resonate with and buy your product, because doing a competitive teardown of other messaging in a desk research capacity, it'll help you get smarter faster and it'll help you figure out your own messaging, but it's not going to take you to the finish line. So just thinking about your sort of like distribution, again, going back to confidence intervals and levels of fidelity and relevance to your own business and decisions is the way to think about it.
Yeah, I would imagine too that things cascade down. So for example, something keeps coming up on a gong recording that you didn't think of, then maybe you step down to the customer interviews or start seeding the CSMs to ask a particular question. So does that happen frequently as well, where you spot something qualitatively that bubbles up and then you're like, oh, I need to do an actual project on this and really understand this better?
Yeah, actually, you hit exactly on that. The way it usually works is there's what is happening. There's something happening that you see a point in time. Again, even to the CEO finding a competitor, right? That's a point in time.
Yeah.
You might monitor and see it continue to bubble up and it gets momentum. And then you have to get to the layer of why it's happening or how come a decision is being made for another competitor, or whatever the example is. But that dichotomy of getting your hands around the lay of the land and what actually activities or changes are going on, and then figuring out like why, so that you can then figure out, so what and now what? So why should I care about this? Does it matter to us? And then now, if we do care about it, what do we do about it to react or capitalize on the opportunity, whatever it is?
Yeah, and I'm curious then with that, because if you're running a lot of it internally, sometimes the objectivity isn't there. You know what I mean? Like people will think something about the product will think something about the product they built is more important than it actually is. So maybe they're a little biased that way. Or same thing with marketing. They're like stuck on a particular message that they think works. So how do you balance that? Is it bringing in external sources as well and third party? Or yeah, how do you handle that side of it?
It's a very good question, even as a team of 12 here, where I'm the newest person on the team at a year in, and I'm like, I'm going to hang on to this objectivity. And sometimes you might not want to hear what I have to say, but we're in the thick of AI everything. And so there's very cool stuff happening, and our engineers are absolutely amazing. But I'm like, Bob from PepsiCo might not know what that means. And I have to make sure he does, so that he comes to talk to us about what we actually can help him with by way of our AI capabilities. But yeah, I'll also say that it's hard. This is where you pay a research vendor in big companies, because having that objectivity can sometimes be hard if you've got a big stakeholder who really thinks something should be one way. But the other piece of it is, and this is where things like SparkToro or other social listening or keyword research, if you're seeing the language people are using, you're seeing what type of content people are or aren't engaging with, wherever you're posting and sharing that, you'll start to pick up the level of like sophistication your audience might be at, the language that they're using. This is just where voice of the customer research becomes really compelling. And so whether it's primary research or here's the language all of our competitors are using, you can see the level of technical that they are operating at. There's probably a reason why. And if we have a hypothesis that they're just dumbing things down, let's just test it before we like, and that can mean A/B testing. It can mean go pay for some research, but it can be I'm saying it as if it's easy, and it's a very difficult line to navigate. But yeah, usually it's a balance of what else can you capture voice of customer wise, and then how can you bite-sized test to see what's resonating and what's working versus what's maybe alienating or confusing.
Yeah, and I find it interesting too. You mentioned you've been there a year and you're the newest person, which that's not super common either. So that's an interesting space to be in. And I found every time I started a company, I learn about something new and think, man, I should have done this in my prior job. So here, for example, we do video testimonials. I realize how poorly I did those at previous companies now that I have become more of a subject matter expert. So now that you're more of an expert on research than you probably were in previous jobs, what do you wish you would have done? If you could go back to your old jobs, you're like, I wish I would have done this one research thing.
Yeah, this is interesting because I've always been at vendors, and I only in my last role at Refine Labs was I the customer of research, or the one doing research and needing a vendor. So I think for me, it is the ecosystem approach. I was like, we do primary, I got to do primary. And then here it's like taking that perspective and knowing all these other types of tools out there, which I just mentioned a bunch of them in the stack, being able to tap from more sources without needing to pay for this and this and this, because obviously that's not realistic. It just is not wasn't for me, for the companies that I was necessarily at. And even what we've seen in our research, you tend to like, some companies just really love primary and that's all they do. Some companies don't have any budget and they like someone sitting on Google and that's all they do. But this multidisciplinary approach where you can just get more insight, even, to your question just now, there's voice of the customer. There's what does everybody else know about this space that we're not totally ignoring? I think it's like taking that. I haven't cracked the code, as I said, here and trying to figure out our flow just because we're moving quickly and it's only me thinking through things. But like, what is the flow between using all these different sources of data, staying smart, socializing and bundling up what needs to be socialized, storing and reporting, which is a whole other can of worms. And I don't have time for that. If somebody has questions, they can come and ask me, but I'm not going to beautify a whole data file just for maybe no one to look at it. But yeah, I think that's probably what it comes down to.
Yeah, I think that last point's an interesting one too, because for some people, when they hear research, they think, yeah, internal research, I'm going to share with the sales team, I'm going to share with the marketing team. There's also the external research that you publish, builds expertise, and it's more of a marketing play. Like Hockey Stack has done that really well lately. Gong historically has done that really well. So is that something, do you suggest people think through from the start? Or is, again, more like you start to see these findings bubble up and then you're like, okay, this can actually become an external report?
It comes down to what your objective is as either a team or individual doing the research. There are certain times when you need to figure out something for your strategy that you need to optimize for the information that you need. And if maybe you can spin off content off of that because you learned something interesting, great. But if you're optimizing for what's going to be cool or interesting, it might not always totally align with what you're trying to solve for your business. Yeah. To give an example of our most recent, we spent Q1 doing a ton of different research with all of these different sources. I knew that there were pieces of it that we were going to want to publish content around, but I started with what are the things that we need to know and the knowledge gaps that we need to close. And by definition, some of that we're not going to publish because it's basically what informed our decisions and come through and what we actually end up offering. But it all comes back to if you're just starting, it's an interesting debate in that you should start research with an objective in mind. But at the same time, if you're monitoring things or you're answering specific questions, you might just have a hypothesis in mind, or you're not just sitting on Google for the sake of it. But you don't always have this is exactly what I'm going to do with this information. It's more, I'm monitoring to stay smart on this. And then when there's something that I need to action on, I will know, and then I will do something. But it's not always as clear cut to say, I'm going to monitor this competitive landscape because of this report in 3 months. As nice as that would be.
Yeah, it's funny because coming from top down, sometimes people, it's like shiny object syndrome that all marketers and product people, like myself included, have, where the CEO says, oh, company X did this cool research study. Go do a research study. It's not like a hypothesis of here's what the study is, here's how it aligns. So I think there's that fine balance there. To go back to what you talked about, if CEO or senior leadership asks you a question, think about the why first and the level of context. So I think we unpacked the little R research, which sounds a lot scary or a lot less scary than big R research. So I appreciate that. For listeners, though, if they want to learn more about this, connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, I'm active on LinkedIn. I also have post our blogs and my weekly thoughts on our website. So if anybody wants to connect on any of the thoughts, they're always happy to hop on a call and nerd out on any of this stuff. But otherwise, LinkedIn will be best.
Awesome. And it's askwonder.com, right? It's the URL
right.
For everyone out there. Perfect. So we'll include those in our show notes for everyone. Victoria, thanks so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
This is great. Thanks so much. Happy lowercase r researching, everyone.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. My key takeaway is just to view research as an ecosystem. So qualitative, quantitative, one-off, ongoing, small, big, external, internal, all of these different forms of research interact with each other and need to be combined, and they all kind of need to be informed and learn from each other as well. If you enjoyed this episode, please head on over to Apple Podcasts, leave us a 5-star review. I really appreciate it. It helps the show grow. And as always, I'll be back next week with a new episode.